Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we are on the 13th chapter of the Gita. I like to try to find connections between the various chapters of the Gita. So, what links the 10th to the 11th chapter, what links 11 to 12, like that. How do things flow? I don't particularly see a flow from 12 to 13. I could probably invent one. I don't think it's impossible to come up with something, some points of connection. But traditionally, for the last 1,500 years, commentators have been noticing that the Gita seems to be divided into 3 sections. First section that deals with karma, how to act in this world. Second section deals with bhakti, devotion to God. And a third section deals with jnana, or knowledge. Now, that's not a super clean breakdown, because the 4th chapter of the Gita, which is in the first section of the Gita called the karma section, is called Jnana Yoga. Do you guys follow that? And ideas like jnana come up all over the first 6 chapters. And then how to act in this world shows up in the middle 6 and the last 6. And so there's definitely a considerable amount of overlap where the same themes are gone over through all the chapters. And so, in a lot of ways, every chapter of the Gita has some bhakti within it, some knowledge within it, some advice on how to act in this world within it. I guess as an aside, if you take a yoga teacher training class, people will generally tell you that there's 4 kinds of yoga. Have you guys heard that before? And if you read an introductory book on Hinduism, you'll find these 4 types of yoga. Let's leave that door cracked. So the 4 types of yoga would then be, and Ross, do me a favor, open that second door so I can see that. I just want to be able to see the foyer. Thanks, man. If you take an introductory course on Hinduism at just like a local university or something like that, or you go to take a yoga teacher training, they'll oftentimes tell you there's 4 kinds of yoga. And those 4 kinds of yoga are jnana yoga, karma yoga, bhakti yoga, and then raja yoga. Raja yoga is like the meditational one, like the asana meditation one. Usually like to call that raja yoga. The word raja yoga is a retronym. There's a 15th century book called the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. And in that book, it refers to the yoga of Patanjali, or the pre-existing yoga, as Raja Yoga. And it contrasts that yoga to Hatha, which is the method it's teaching. And so classical yoga got known in the medieval period as Raja Yoga. And somebody named Vivekananda in the 1890s wrote a book called Raja Yoga. And in that book, he said there's 4 kinds of yoga. So that idea that there's 4 kinds of yoga and that one of them is Raja Yoga, that idea is roughly 120 years old. Now the idea that there's 3 types of yoga, that goes back further, much further. Krishna never says there's 3 types of yoga in the Gita. So it's not like that is the universal way of taxonomizing or breaking down Vedic literature or Vedic thought or Hinduism. It's one model that's used. It's one model that's used. Sometimes modern day interpreters of like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, they'll say that Ishwar Pranidhan is for bhakti, and then Swadhyaya is for jnana, and then Tapa is for people who are interested in karma yoga. Tapa means austerity. So if you're like physical, you do austerities, and then you study. Swadhyaya means study, and so you study if you're interested in knowledge. And then bhakti is devotions. And then they sometimes say, oh, for emotional people they do bhakti, and for intellectual people they do jnana or knowledge, and then for active physical people you do tapas or austerity. And then for transcendental people or people who are equally balanced, then you do Raja Yoga. That was Vivekananda's theory. Like I said, his theory is 120 years old. This whole idea of different types of yoga, different strokes for different folks. Yata Tata Pat, as many opinions as you have, that many paths you have. This is all really neo-Hindu. It's new stuff. It's a new idea within Hinduism. But karma, jnana, and bhakti, those ideas and looking at the Vedic literatures as roughly consisting of those 3 strains, that goes back to the Bhagavatam. And karma is for people who are attached to this world. Jnana is for people who are disgusted with this world. And bhakti is for people who are neither too attached nor too disgusted with the world. Sometimes people just, they can't date. They're too traumatized. They can't meet somebody. They can't have a relationship. They're too bent out of shape. You see little micro versions of this. I had a bad breakup. I'm in rough shape. I don't want to date. It usually lasts like a week, 10 days, or 10 hours, just essentially until they meet another attractive member of the attractive member, same, opposite sex, whatever it might be, but until you meet an attractive person, then all of a sudden those ideas go out the window and it becomes faded, and you were supposed to meet and they're your soulmate, and so on and so forth. But at least we get sort of a mini example, a micro example of what a gyan might look like, where you're disgusted with the world, you don't want to touch it. Karma, you want to enjoy the world, but you're not sinful, so you want to enjoy the world properly. You want to do the right thing and enjoy. You're an enjoyer, but you're not an illicit enjoyer. You're an enjoyer, but you're not a sinful enjoyer. That's a karmi. And a jnani, you're disgusted with the world. You're over it. You're done with it. And so, for those jnanis, via negativa philosophy, neti, not this, not that, define the world by negation, defining God by negation, defining your life by what you don't want, that it becomes an attractive model because you're really disgusted with the stuff here, and so you want to define things by what God is not, what you are not, what you're not into, what you're not about. What kind of person do you want to be partnered with? I don't want to be with a jerk. I don't want to be with a this. I don't want to be with a that. And then the bhakta is someone who is attracted to divinity and is open to grace. Interestingly, the 12-step program is fundamentally based in bhakti. I need help. Somebody is there to help me. I'm going to open up myself and become receptive to that. I'm going to take an active role in aspiring for grace. But yeah, the 12-step program is fundamentally built around a model of grace. Half the steps, at least, involve accepting grace in your life, becoming receptive to it, acknowledging that you need some help, and so on and so forth. The thing is, if you have devotion for God, then you're going to show it. Once you show it, you're doing something, and now you've just gotten into karma. To have devotion to divinity, you have to know something about divinity. And therefore, knowledge is a prerequisite. So when you look at bhakti, the idea of bhakti being devoted to divinity, being receptive to grace, it's based on knowledge. It's based on action. Those two things are inseparable. And so even when you look at how these systems are, when they're defined as three different systems, they're never actually defined as three discrete systems where they're mutually exclusive and comprehensively exhaustive. The Misi principle. Mutually exclusive, comprehensively exhaustive. Sometimes things are meant to naturally overlap, and you're not supposed to have, for instance, mothers and fathers are not discrete categories. They have a lot more overlap than they do separation. So if you want to define parenthood as motherhood and fatherhood, it's problematic because those two categories, being a mother, being a father, are not mutually exclusive. It's not that everything mothers do, fathers don't do, and vice versa. There's tremendous overlap. In fact, there's more overlap between mothers and fathers than there is difference. And so sometimes the Misi principle fails because it's looking at something which is not meant to be discretely defined, where one thing does not overlap with another. When you look at how karma, jnana, and bhakti are conceived of in Vedic literatures, the earliest source I'm aware of where they're referenced as three separate paths is the Srimad Bhagavatam. I'm not aware of any earlier source in the Upanishads. Certainly the word karma comes up in earlier sources. The word jnana comes up. The word bhakti comes up. But these as three distinct ways of orienting yourself towards transcendence or towards spirituality. The earliest source I've been able to find is the Bhagavatam, the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam. And there, you don't find that they are mutually exclusive categories. Nor in the Gita do you find that they're mutually exclusive categories. That's why there are verses about bhakti in every single chapter. That's why there's knowledge in every single chapter. And that's why Krishna teaches you how to act in knowledge with devotion in every single chapter. Krishna oftentimes says, mat karma krit, do your work for me. He talks about doing karma with jnana. He joins these ideas together. He speaks of acting with devotion, of doing everything as an offering to Him, of knowing Him to be the Supreme Lord. And so when Krishna defines bhakti, a prerequisite for bhakti is that you know Krishna is the Supreme. When Krishna defines action, you have to know you're not the body so you can act in a detached way. So knowledge is a prerequisite for both action as well as devotion. Devotion naturally entails action. Action leads to knowledge. Action leads to devotion. Knowledge leads to devotion. And so you find these things intermingle, overlap, permeate one another. This sometimes leads you to believe, then you require knowledge to be devoted. But knowledge of God that makes you want to surrender to God is not called knowledge. It's called bhakti. Action that brings you closer to God is not called karma. It's called bhakti. Do you follow? So when karma is done for Krishna's pleasure, that becomes bhakti. That is bhakti. When knowledge is about Krishna that leads you to be devoted to Krishna, that knowledge is bhakti. Did you follow this? Otherwise, you get into a system where you start to say that bhakti becomes dependent on karma, and therefore what you should do is teach everybody to do karma, teach everybody jnana, knowledge, and action, and then eventually they'll get to bhakti. And then bhakti becomes built on a house of karma and jnana. Our commentators don't like that because Krishna over and over again just tells you to just surrender. And so for Krishna's words to be true, the option to just surrender has to always be there. And so that means bhakti has to be by itself a stand-alone tradition that doesn't depend on other stuff and is not secondary or dependent or contingent on other more essential facets. And so the way bhakti is framed out in Vedic literatures in general and also in the Gita, it's a complete system. It's A to Z. It has everything you need and more. Because of that, our understanding, the Gita's understanding, is that when you do things for Krishna, that is bhakti. When you do things for Krishna's pleasure without expectation of reward, that is bhakti. It's action, but it's not really action. When you understand divinity so that you can better surrender to the divine, that's not knowledge, that's bhakti. Do you guys follow this? So, the Gita is divided into 3 sections for the last 1,500 years, karma, jnana, and bhakti. We're in the jnana section. So there's been a massive shift between the 12th and the 13th chapter. The 12th chapter is all about bhakti, and the 13th chapter is going to be very much about jnana. That said, the 4th chapter is also about jnana. Jnana comes up in the 3rd chapter as well, in the 2nd chapter as well, in the 5th chapter. Jnana comes up in every chapter. Knowledge. Jnana means knowledge. And karma, or action, not reaction. We think of karma as reaction, but it really means action. Karma comes up in every chapter as well. But there's a shift. Now, I could get fancy and try to explain the shift and show that, it's smooth. And probably I could convince some low-level people that it's all smooth. Like Krishna just answered to Arjuna that devotion was above knowledge, and therefore Arjuna wanted to look back at theories of knowledge which he'd heard before, but see how they're related to devotion, and therefore they went back over the pre-existing theories of knowledge, but this time laden with bhakti so that you would see that they lead to bhakti. I just came up with that off the top of my head. And so it's not tough to do, come up with something cool like that. I hear that and I'm like, wow, that's pretty good actually. But that's always true. Krishna never looks at knowledge separate from bhakti entirely. Knowledge always leads to devotion from the very beginning of the Gita, from the 2nd chapter of the Gita onwards. And so it's not like something special happens here and we're looking. Also the knowledge we're looking at here, although it has been gone over before, there's so many knowledges which are gone over and over again in the Gita that are detailed multiple times. And so Arjuna switches it up here and he asks some questions about Checha, Gya, Purusha, Prakriti, Jnanam, and Gyayam. 6 subjects he asks about. He did the same thing at the end of the 8th chapter, or at the beginning of the 8th chapter. However, Krishna had mentioned 6 topics at the end of the 7th chapter. Then Krishna asked about him. Here, Arjuna just jumps in without being prompted by Krishna and says, hey, tell me about these 6 things. It's a real shift in the conversation. And so it works really well with the commentators and their statement that the last 6 chapters are about knowledge. Super bummed today you weren't here for this. Walking in late, bumming me out. You can go back and listen to the rest. You can go back and listen to it afterwards. And it'll be hard for you to follow because I'm not going to go over the whole thing for you. Yeah, so the commentators saying the last 6 chapters are about Gyan fits nicely because we have a real shift in voice. Did you guys follow that? Not shift in voice, rather. A real shift in topics. And so the last 6 chapters have really just flowed. In fact, the previous 12 chapters have flowed one to another. This is a real shift. Perhaps the strongest, in my opinion, in the entire Gita. It's probably the only chapter in the Gita I don't like to connect to the preceding chapter. I like to see it as a shift, and it fits nicely because we're moving from 12 to 13. The last shift was from 6 to 7, but it's Krishna's, the last verse of the 6th chapter is all about devotion, and Krishna rolls right into a theology which allows you to be more devoted. It flows really nicely. This one is a real sharp turn. It's a real sharp 90-degree turn. So, there you go. Just to reiterate what I said one more time. The commentators for 1,500 years, which is the time of the first commentary we still have extant, they've been saying that there's 3 sections to the Gita. First 6 chapters, karma. Second 6, bhakti. Last 6, jnana. That doesn't work as a hard line. And the commentators themselves will acknowledge that all the chapters contain all those elements. When you go to a low-level high school, college, or just 300-hour, or even a 500-hour, they'll tell you there are these 4 types of yoga. And they think it's real authentic, because if you read a low-level book on Hinduism, it'll give them to you. But that stuff came from a neo-Hindu philosopher 120 years ago named Vivekananda, who was pushing his own agenda for something called Raja Yoga. And even the word Raja Yoga is only from the 15th century. And then it's only referring to Patanjali's yoga, which obviously the Vedic literatures were existing way before that. And so you've got very medieval neo-concepts, and then that's used as a framework to understand the entire length and breadth of Hinduism. It's a bad model, because you're using, it'd be like if you tried to understand Christianity from the Mormons. It's cool, it gives you a cool look, but they've only been around for 150 years. They don't understand Judaism. They don't understand, the Jewish roots of Christianity, or even, the beginnings of Christianity. They don't necessarily understand that. And so, neo-Hindu philosophy as being the categorization system you'd use to understand Hinduism has some pretty serious flaws. And in the sadhana pada of the Yoga Sutras, there's this tapa swadhyaya, ishvara pranidhan as being the 3 elements of Kriya Yoga. And those are sometimes linked up to this karma, jnana, bhakti model too. And then different types of personality types and so on and so forth. But I gave you the oldest place I've seen where the systems are introduced, the Bhagavatam, that it's about being attached to the world but pious, disgusted with the world, or neither. And so, but even when we look at that system, we find that these karma, jnana, and bhakti, they intermingle with each other and they permeate each other tremendously. And so it's important to understand this, otherwise you end up trying to shush them to start. Otherwise you end up trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. Like if you go to a Vedic wedding, there's 5 or 6 weddings stacked on top of each other. So you're like, which one is the wedding? They're all the wedding. But there's 5 or 6 different rituals, so which one's the important one? They're all important. No, but which one is equivalent to like the saying of the vows? There is no singular event like there is with the Western wedding that's equivalent to saying of the vows. There's 5 or 6 events, all of which are important. Well, isn't there one that's the most important? No. Or perhaps yes, but different people will say a different part of the event is more important. You follow? So the Indian Constitution says the Saptapadigamani, the 7 steps, is the most important. But the Kanyadan, the giving away of the bride, in a lot of traditions is the most important. Then there's also a place where you take your own vows, but that's actually a lot of times less important than when the father gives away the bride. But the father giving away the bride isn't center stage in the Western tradition. It's the mutual vows said between the man and the woman. But that's, based on the idea, I think to some extent, that, it's a man and woman taking vows to each other, as opposed to 2 communities or 2 families coming together. where it's two families coming together, the father presenting the daughter might be considered to be the most significant event. You guys following this? So we have our ideas about what's most important, but in Hinduism, it's not quite that simple. There's no exact one single moment. Similarly, bhakti, karma, and jnana intermingle, and you should not try to make them into discrete categories. And foolish yoga teachers all over the country make that mistake every day. And so we're trying to correct it now. You guys follow that? And foolish college professors make that mistake every day too. Although it's gradually changing. If you look at kind of current post-colonialist trends in Hindu studies, they're getting more into Vaishnava, Shakta, and Shaiva as the three strains, and the philosophical underpinnings as opposed to karma, jnana, and bhakti. And Raja Yoga, which really gets like dated in the modern period as only 120 years old. Okay, I just repeated the whole thing a second time. So, the 13th chapter begins with Arjuna asking, Icham Vedi Tum, I desire to know. What do I want to know? Etat, I want to know this. What's this? Prakritim Purusham Chaiva Chetra Chetragyam Evacha Jnanam Gyayam Chakeshava. I want to know Jnanam Gyayam. What is knowledge? What is to be known? Gyaya means to be known, the object of knowledge. I want to know Prakriti and Purusha. I want to know the energy and the person. And I want to know Chetra and Chetragya, the field and the knower of the field. Now, these are loaded terms. These terms are not existing in a vacuum. They are philosophical terms which were used in the Vedic literature predating the Gita. They're philosophical terms that we find in the Upanishads. And Krishna has his own take on what each of these terms means, which he's going to spell out in the 13th chapter. But they're not just brand new terms. So knowledge means what is knowledge and how do you acquire knowledge. Gyayam is what is the highest thing that's worthy of studying in this world. Therefore, Gyayam isn't just what is to be known. That's a little too enigmatic. Gyayam really means what is the most valuable thing worth studying. What's worth devoting oneself to. It really, in that sense, becomes an ethical question or an axiological question or an aesthetic question. Aesthetics is what is beautiful, and ethics is what is good, and axiology is the study of value. And therefore it includes both what is good and what is beautiful. And there's a term, axiology, that acts as an umbrella term for any time you're studying what is valuable, what is worth pursuing, what is worth being devoted to, what is worth being interested in. So Gyayam, what is to be known, could really be framed out as what is the highest thing worthy of one's attention. And Jnanam, how do you acquire knowledge about that thing? And what are the fundamental building blocks of knowledge? So it's both passive and active. It's like, what is knowledge? Like give me like the raw stuff of knowledge. And then how can I become knowledgeable? What's the process I can follow which will allow me to acquire knowledge? Like you could explain to somebody, they could ask you, how do you perform a surgery? And you could probably rattle off how to perform brain surgery. Like if you gave a brain surgeon maybe an hour, he could rattle off how to perform a 20-hour brain surgery in an hour. But he'd be using a bunch of terminology and fleshing it out and putting it together in a way that you weren't able to understand. Did you guys follow that? But then he could also say, if you want to learn how to perform this brain surgery, you need to go to medical school for 4 years, and then, your specialization for a few years, and then a few years of residency, and some more specialization. and then you'll be able to do this. And so that you could explain to somebody what the process you're going to need to go through in order to actually learn the stuff. That has value too, because knowledge isn't just information, but it's information in a particular delivery system which is able to be digested. You guys follow that? So jnanam and gyayam. What is knowledge? And then how do I acquire it? And then what should I study? That's jnanam and gyayam. And then chaitra is what is the field? Well, Krishna's going to tell us the field means what's the body. The field is the body. And in Kshetragya is the soul who knows the body. We are consciously aware of our body. Interestingly, we're not really aware of other people's bodies the same way we're aware of our own body. For instance, somebody could be suffering a migraine headache. And if they did not display external symptoms that you could see, they could be in tremendous pain. And you wouldn't know. Because our knowledge, to a large extent, is delimited by the body that we occupy. We fully know the pleasures and pains of our own body. To some extent, it's also possible that you're diseased and you don't know it until the disease has progressed to a certain level. So although you might have cancer, you may not become aware that you have cancer until you're symptomatic, at which point it might have already metastasized and you're terminal. You might not have figured it out. You guys following this? So the body and the knower of the body, meaning the conscious self that's aware of the body. And then you have Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is sort of the larger category of all souls. The word Purusha in Sanskrit, if you look in Hindi and you go to a bathroom and it's a male bathroom, you want to look to see if it's male or female to know which door to go through. The word Purush will be over the male bathroom. So it means male. Literally, it means male. It also means person, just like the word mankind. The plight of man isn't just the plight of men, males. It's the plight of all of mankind. So sometimes we use the word man, the suffering of man, the plight of man, the existential dilemma of man. We'll use the word man also in a broader sense to mean human. So Purusha is also used like that. Purusha is also used to mean soul, and it's also used to mean God. So the word Purusha is a multivalent word in Sanskrit, which has a number of different usages, depending on the context. And so in this instance, Purusha and Prakriti refers to two fundamental forces that exist in the world from a philosophy called Sankhya, that we've already gone over twice in the Gita, in the 2nd chapter and in the 7th chapter. And Sankhya is essentially a way to try to explain everything which exists in a simple way. So what exists in this world? I don't know. There's stuff and there's people. There's stuff and there's people. There's dead things and there's living things. Use things, value people. Don't use people and value things. There's spirit and there's matter. There's life and there's matter. It's a very straightforward, easy to understand way of looking at the world. There's conscious things and then there's stuff. If you hack up a chair, no one accuses you of, they have, you can go to a place and they'll give you a baseball bat and you can go and beat up on cars and break stuff. They have these, I don't know what they call them. What are they called? Rage rooms? Is that what they're called? They have these rage rooms where you go and pay money and you break stuff. You punch stuff and break stuff, and I'm assuming the walls don't have studs in them. That way, because if you punch them, they just, you punch through the drywall as opposed to breaking your hand. They're set up in such a way to make it convenient for you to get out your aggression. Rage rooms. And so nobody goes to jail for mercilessly assaulting a bunch of stuff in a rage room. You follow? This, by the way, was a problem with slavery. Slaves in the U.S. were considered to be property, which means you could do anything to a slave. That wasn't the case in other countries and places in the world. Even thousands of years prior, slaves had some rights. Bizarrely, in the U.S., we had chattel slavery up until it was abolished, which meant slaves, in most cases, had no rights whatsoever. They were no different than a shoe or a table in the eyes of the law. So you could, theoretically, for instance, you could dismember a slave for fun. You follow? Because they were considered to be property. Other concepts of slavery were not as insane. Slaves, even in the ancient world, would have some limited rights, something. You couldn't just treat them like a chair. But anyway, in these rage rooms, nobody goes to jail because it's stuff that you're assaulting and not people. It's not even assaulting. You're just whatever. Punching stuff. It's therapeutic. It's good for you. That's because we make a basic distinction between living things that have some value and stuff that can just be exploited and utilized in whatever way you want it to be. Even concepts like destroying the environment. Either you're destroying the environment for other people, and you have a right to do that, or the earth is somehow conscious in some sort of pantheistic way, and therefore crimes against the earth are crimes against a living being. From an atheistic perspective, you could say it's crimes against all the other living beings that exist on the planet. A lot of times atheists have a hard time with ethics because people could say if we're all just space dust, what does it really matter what we do to each other? And that's not such an easy thing to dismiss without reference to a higher power or some unifying principle. It's not that atheists can't do moral philosophy, but it's hard. They definitely have more of an uphill battle than someone who goes to theism. Theism provides you with some sort of objective platform to then use to establish morality once you've established theism. Jnanam Gyayam. Say it with me. Jnanam Gyayam. 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 There you go. Knowledge and how to acquire knowledge is Jnanam, and what is worthy of knowing is Gyayam. Kshetra, say it with me. Kshetra Gya. And it would actually be Kshetragya. Would be like, because it's a compound. But anyway, so Kshetragya. Gya means knower of Kshetra, the field. And the field is the body, and the knower of the body is the conscious self. And then you get two other things, Purusham and Prakriti. Prakriti is stuff, and Purusha is people. It's a little more complicated than that because Prakriti also includes mental stuff. Normally we think of mental stuff as being part of you, but the Vedic theory of Prakriti holds that the physical and the subtle world is all material. So your emotional and mental states are also material, and the self is a witness existing in transcendence. Whereas normally, feelings and thoughts would all be considered to be spiritual in a classical Cartesian dualistic model. Did you guys follow that? So Arjuna says, what are these 6 things? I wish to know about Prakriti, Purusha, the field, the knower of the field, knowledge, and the object of knowledge. Krishna says this body is called the field, and one who knows the body is the knower of the field. Now, because I explained everything to you guys beforehand, you should have been able to understand those 2 verses very easily. right? And then Krishna throws in a bit of a red herring, throws in a little extra here. You should understand that I'm also the knower in all bodies. I'm also the knower in all bodies. So Krishna is also a knower, a conscious being. But there's a difference between Krishna and us. What's the difference? Krishna knows everything, whereas we only know our own experience. You follow? Now, I could understand, if you're on fire, I could understand that you're suffering because you're screaming, because I have the capacity for empathy, and I burned myself before on a micro level, and so I can understand that horrible burn I got when I touched fire, it must be experienced by you thousands of times over, and I see you screaming in pain. And maybe I've never even screamed that badly, but I've screamed kind of bad, and I can understand you're on a 13 on a scale of 1 to 10, although I've only ever experienced an 8. But what I'm really doing is I'm extrapolating from my own experience, and I'm then seeing that you're making, like for instance, you could be an actor, and it could be a fake fire, and you could be acting in a movie, and I just drove by, didn't realize the cameras were rolling, and I thought you were actually experiencing pain. I run out to save you, and you're like, you screwed up my shot. Because I don't actually know what you're experiencing. I empathize and extrapolate from my own experience and then look for your symptoms. Krishna being omnipotent, and one feature of omnipotence would be omniscience. And so one feature of an all-powerful deity would be all-knowingness. Knowledge is power, and so a power, and so a type of power, and so an all-powerful deity would automatically be an all-knowing deity. Did you follow that? So Krishna knows everything. So even here you see the distinction between the soul and God is concretized. We're both knowers, we're both conscious, but Krishna is universally conscious, omni-conscious, and we're only conscious of our own self. You guys following this? And to understand this body and the knower is called knowledge. That's my opinion. Well, considering that Krishna is God, his opinion is pretty substantive. But it's a pretty simple definition of knowledge. What's knowledge? What's knowledge? No. What's knowledge?
Understanding the difference between Krishna.
No. Oh my God, you guys are killing me. Let's read it again. To understand this body and its knower is called knowledge. What's knowledge? Understanding the body and the difference between your body and you is knowledge. That's a pretty simple definition of knowledge. It's super spiritual and it's powerful. It's a good working definition of what real knowledge is. To understand the difference between the self and the body. To understand that you are not your body. That things don't happen to you, they happen to your body. That you are beyond your body. That you own your body, not vice versa. That your body is a vehicle that you occupy. It's a powerful idea. And so Krishna says, hey, here's Chaitra and Chaitragya and Jnanam. Boom, 1, 2, 3. The body, its knower, and to know the body and its knower is to be in knowledge. And he threw in a little extra, which is that actually I know everything. And so he inserts himself into the equation. Which of course would support my made-up theory that the 12th chapter is connected to the 13th, because Krishna is now going back over the knowledge he's previously articulated and throwing in himself into the equation so that that knowledge can be understood in terms of bhakti. Did you guys follow that? I actually don't think it's a bad theory. It's not a bad way of connecting the two chapters together. And the 7th chapter begins with a Sankhya, and the 13th chapter begins with a Sankhya. So he does his 6 chapters on bhakti, and he goes back and again, and we get the most detailed version of Sankhya, which is enumeration, where they try to say everything that exists in the world so you can have a good understanding of everything that exists and categorize things nicely. Like, you can divide your body into legs and hands and arms and feet and a torso and a head, You can throw in a neck and shoulders and a back and a bum and a few other things like that. And you got a pretty, it doesn't take forever, but we don't have to know every single cell and organ. You could divide your body up into its main limbs, and you'd have a pretty good understanding. Its main organs, you'd have a pretty good understanding. It's not quite true. There's trillions of cells in a body, trillions upon trillions of cells. And then each of those cells has so many parts, mitochondria, and cellular walls, and all sorts of different processes going on within each individual cell, and then the way cells connect with one another. Your cell has a nucleus. It interfaces with other cells in a variety of really cool ways. You could break down the body into each cell, and then the structure of each cell, and then the way that cellular structure was interfacing, and the way all those cells interface with every other cell, and that would really be complete knowledge on a quantum level of your body. You can even further break down each cell into its quantum elements, because each cell is made up of so many protons, neutrons, and electrons, and those are made up of neutrinos and bosons, and you could break it down further and further and further, and you have to know each neutrino and how it was interacting. And then so many of those build a cell. You follow? Do you guys, does that make sense? But you can also just say, hey, here are your limbs, here are your organs, and if you understand those, you have a pretty good understanding of your body. Sometimes a simple understanding can be quite profound. You guys following? So, I want to know 6 things. Okay? The field is your body. The knower of the field is the self. And I know all selves. Therefore, I'm the super self, the omniscient self. And if you can understand the body and the soul, you're in knowledge. And furthermore, if you can understand the body and the soul and how I'm a special soul, an oversoul, a super soul, a supreme soul, then you really know things. Do you guys follow this? Now please hear my brief description of the field of activity. Well, Krishna just told you what the kshetra is, what the field is. What's the field? The body. But he's not done yet. He's going to go into it in a bit more detail. And how it's constituted, what its changes are, whence it is produced, who that knower of the fields of activities is, and what his influences are. So now we're going to do kshetra and kshetragya. We're going to do it again. You follow? We're going to do the kshetra and the kshetragya again. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Dude, you're killing me. I'm really trying to help you guys here. He just explained kshetra and kshetragya. What's kshetra? Mace?
Kshetra is the field.
What does that mean?
The body.
Okay, let's not do fancy. Let's just do clean understandings for people at the bus stop. What's kshetragya? You just did what I told him not to do. You get an F minus. I would give you a full 0 if that was possible. Huh? There you go. He just said the field. I said, don't do that. Give me a functional definition. You just did exactly what I told him not to do. What's kshetra? Okay. What's kshetragya? There you go. What's kshetra? What's kshetragya? There you go. How are spirits related to bodies? They animate them, they constitute them, they know them. You follow? So Krishna just defined the body and the self as the field and the knower of the field, and now he's going to do it again. So he's going to describe the self and the body, but he's going to do so more elaborately. Like I can say you have a body, but I can say your body is made up of hands and feet and legs and arms and teeth and a head and a neck and so on and so forth. You follow? It's the same information. I'm just going into a bit more detail. You got it? So now Krishna says, please hear from me in brief. As I describe the field of activity, Chaitra, how it's constituted, what its changes are, whence it is produced, that means where it comes from, who that knower of the field of activities is, that's the self, and what his influences are ostensibly over the field of activities. You guys following this? That knowledge of the field of activities and the knower of activities is described by various sages in various Vedic writings. It's especially presented in the Vedanta Sutra with all reasoning as to cause and effect. Krishna's just saying there that I'm not making this stuff up. There's a pre-existing tradition which details all of this. And I'm now going to summarize that tradition. The 5 great elements. What are the 5 great elements? These are the Mahabhutas, the great elements. What are they? Huh? No. 5 great elements. What are they? Earth, water, fire, air, and space. I don't know what's so funny about that, but that's what the 5 great elements are. They're the basic building blocks of reality. Earth, water, fire, air, and space. Then, false ego intelligence. That's ahankar and buddhi. Then avyakta, the unmanifested, the kind of totality of matter in its unmanifested state. Then the 10 senses. What are the 10 senses? Yeah. Taste, sight, touch, smell, and sound. That's 5, right? What's the 6th sense? The mind. You guys like, what's wrong with you people? You don't know that? A 6th sense? You never heard that before? I've got a 6th sense. It's intuition of the mind. Are you guys awake? Come on, man. You guys can do this. I'm getting worried. That was the easy one. There's a movie named The 6th Sense. I mean, it's so commonplace. It's like a popular movie. That's not the 6th sense. That's the 11th sense for us. Because there's 10 senses, not 5. What are the other 5, Kim? This is a basic education in Sankhya. You can't really claim to be a yoga teacher if you don't know this stuff. It's the basics of Sankhya, which is the basics of yoga. Yoga works off of a Sankhya metaphysic. It's like saying you're a doctor without knowing basic anatomy. Yes? No. Yes. Evacuation, regeneration, motion, manipulation, and speech. 5 karmendriyas, ways you act on the world. 5 gyanendriyas, indriya means sense, ways you acquire knowledge, ways you pull information in. Taste, sight, touch, smell, and sound. Through your holes. Through the holes in your body. You pull information in. You hear stuff, you smell stuff, you see stuff, you taste stuff in the pores of your skin, you touch stuff. Taste, sight, touch, smell, sound. Ways you pull information in. Then there's ways you push stuff out. Regeneration, your genitals. Evacuation, your anus. Motion, your feet. The ways you move in this world. Manipulation with your hands. You move stuff around. And another way you act on the world? Speech. Speech, you take food in and you speak. So therefore the mouth is very valuable because it both takes information in as well as puts information out there. 5 ways you act on the world, 5 ways the world acts on you. You guys follow this? Okay? Five great elements: false ego, intelligence. Now you could say mind, intelligence, and false ego. You could go manas, buddhi, and ahankar. That'd be a traditional Sankhya. Somehow Krishna misses the manas here. He just says buddhi and ahankar, intelligence and false ego. He skips over manas, but he throws in avyakta, which might be like a mahatattva type thing. The unmanifested, kind of primordial matter that everything eventually evolves from. The mind, oh, there's the mind. There's the mind. Because it says dasha eka. Dasha means 10, and eka means 11. So 1. So 10 plus 1. So the 11 senses. So we name 10, and what's the 11th sense? The mind, and that's why the mind isn't mentioned separately. Do you see that? Normally you would say the 5 gross elements and the 5 subtle elements. Earth, water, fire, air, space, mind, intelligence, and false ego. Mind is thoughts, desires. Intelligence is the ability to control them and differentiate between various things. And then ego is your basic concept of self, your basic sense of identity, which is distinct from specific thoughts and specific controlled thoughts. You have a basic underlying sense of self that's kind of pre-thought. It's not like you're directly thinking, I am a man, I am this age, I am here, I am... You just kind of have that feeling, that basic sense of identity. And then you have specific thoughts or desires, and you have the ability to control those specific thoughts and desires. Mind, intelligence, and false ego. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's a pretty clean definition that'll get you home. You know? If you're stuck out at the club, you got to get home, that'll get you home. There'll be directions to get you home in any good discussion of Sankhya. Then you got your 11 senses. Your 11 senses includes the mind, therefore the mind wasn't mentioned along with intelligence and false ego. You can play with them a bit. They're a little bit movable. You follow? The mind here is considered to be a sense as opposed to subtle matter. Anyway, then you have your Pancha Indriya Gochar, the jurisdiction of the senses. This is called the Tan Matras. That onlys. There are things which are tasted, touched, smelled, seen, and heard. There's the objects of the senses. So you have your senses, taste, sight, touch, smell, and sound. But then you have your objects of your senses, which are things that you taste, smell, touch, hear, and see. So they're dividing the world, and all the stuff of the world is things which are perceivable by those various senses. Did you guys follow this? It's a way of defining the world very much in terms of material entanglement. If I want to get sober, let's say I'm an alcoholic and I want to get sober, and I'm looking at a town or a street, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to notice where all the bars are. And I'm going to walk to the other side of the street. In fact, if there's a street where there's a bunch of bars, I'm not even going to go down that street. I might even put my hand up when I'm driving by that street so I don't see the bars. You follow? Because I'm sober, and I'm interested in being sober, and I know that might tempt me. And so when I look at, or when I go to a drugstore, I avoid the drug section. The whole section where they sell drugs in drugstores. That's why they're called drugstores. And so I'm going to avoid that whole pharmacy section. I'm just going to go and pick up a towel. You know? I'm going to go pick up a towel and some sunscreen and go to the beach, get a boogie board. I'm going to avoid the whole pharmacy section. You follow? So, or if you're a vegan, with like laser sharp focus, look at a list of 100 ingredients and immediately find the one non-vegan ingredient on the list. Do you guys have that ability? You just look, it's like methyl cellulose, okay, no problem, you know what I mean? As soon as I see a gliss, I know that's glycerin, glycerol, you know what I mean? If I see stare, I know it's like some kind of stearate, that's a potential problem. Lac, that means it could be milk, you know what I mean? I know all the suffixes and affixes and what might be a problem, prefixes and suffixes and what might be a problem. You follow? Does that make sense? Yeah. I know, for instance, that caramel, Caramel, is cool because all 4 versions of caramel, E, 150, A, B, C, and D, are all vegan. Why? Because that's what I spend my time doing. When I'm not here talking to you guys, I'm looking at random lists, numbers, and the chemicals that they correspond to. So, if you're lusty and you look around a room, then you might look for the attractive person in the room. That might be the first thing you look at. You ever had that experience before? Right? You notice the cute boy or the cute girl. First thing you do when you walk in the room, you really spot like the cute boy or girl. And if you're like a criminal, you might look for police officers. Or if you're a tough guy, you might size people up, like see who's strong and who's not. There's all sorts of ways to walk into a room or walk into life, and you're going to notice things other people don't notice. If you're a musician, you might notice the acoustics in a room. Nobody else is looking for the acoustics, but you look for the acoustics. You guys follow this? So this system, it's designed to help you live in this world but not be of it. It's designed to help you live in this world but not get too enmeshed, not get too attached, not get too addicted to the pleasures of the flesh. It lacks that sort of Christian devil, hell forever, fire, sinner type thing. But it does have with it the idea of I don't want to get hung up here and jammed up. And so all the stuff of this world are things to be seen, tasted, smelled, or touched, or seen, as opposed to breaking things up on a quantum level or something like that. You follow? It's a little more complicated than that because really all the stuff in this world is made up of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. But then there's a subtle principle that allows things to be seen, tasted, touched, smelled, or heard that interfaces between your soul, which never really actually touches your soul, almost like that, like 2 points that are coming closer and closer together but never quite actually meet, and then interfaces with the world and allows that world to interface with yourself, your conscious self. Did you guys follow that? So when looking at the world of stuff, it can be consumed by you because there are these principles that allow you to perceive the world, your senses, and then the things of this world are perceivable. Did you guys follow that? It's like a principle of matter that it's perceivable in a variety of ways. It's like radio waves exist, but they can't be seen. But they can be heard. So some things exist that can be heard. Somebody's voice. I guess you could ultimately break down voice and see like stuff coming out of somebody's mouth. But the way we interface with voice is we don't see it, we hear it. You follow? We see things in the sky. We see the stars, we never touch them. You can do jiu-jitsu with your eyes closed, and it doesn't even really affect your performance very much. Because once you're connected to somebody with all 4 of your limbs, you're going off of feeling more than you are off of. You guys follow that? You know how people fish for catfish? I've never done it, but apparently there's like mud holes the catfish live in. And so you reach in there with your arm, and the catfish bites onto your hand, and then you like pull the fish out. You guys ever seen that? Wild, right? I'm like super not like just like sticking my arm down in some muddy hole for some creature to bite me. But anyway, that's what the people do. A real bottom dweller animal, you know? The five sense objects: desire, hatred, happiness, distress, the aggregate, the life symptoms, and convictions. All these are considered in summary to be the field of activities and its interactions. You get it, right? Desire and hatred are woven in there, happiness and distress, right? It's a way of philosophically looking at the world. It's quite simple. Simple enough it can be stated in 2 verses. But it does help you to start to view the world as going on around you and not like with you. And you can separate yourself from it. Does that make sense? All right, we're going to leave it there. Now remember how I said there's knowledge and there's the way of acquiring knowledge? Humility, pridelessness, nonviolence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the object of the senses, sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home, and the rest, even-mindedness amidst pleasant and unpleasant events, constant unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever there may be is ignorance. So, this isn't really knowledge. Humility isn't necessarily knowledge. Maybe it's the result of knowledge. Living in a lonely place isn't necessarily knowledge. It's the result of knowledge. Perceiving the evils of birth, death, old age, and disease, being detached. These things aren't necessarily knowledge. They're either the result of knowledge or, I think a better read, approaching a bona fide guru. It's a way of acquiring knowledge. So now I've described the world in simple. The simplest description of the world is what? The body. A more elaborate description is the body with some of its constituent elements. And now I'm describing how to interface with that body and this world in a way which will lead you to self-realization. Therefore, I'm describing knowledge or the body, and then I'm describing how to interface with the world such that self-realization will ensue. Like, for instance, let's say you just say, well, there's like male and female bodies, right? You understand? And then, people figure this out because we're animals. But you could say, okay, male and female bodies go together and they make babies. And that's like a useful piece of information. Like I said, people generally tend to figure this kind of stuff out, like fishing for catfish, they figure it out somehow. But that would be a useful piece of information. Here's another useful piece of information. There's male and female bodies, and neither one of them are for your enjoyment. And so when you see a body, don't see it as belonging to you, it belongs to God. That's like a spoiler. And so you see something, and then you're taught how to interface with that thing you see. So we're told about the body in this world, and then we're told that we should live in this world, in this body, with humility, pridelessness, nonviolence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a guru, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of sense gratification, absence of false ego, perceiving the bad of birth, death, old age, and disease, being detached, free from entanglement with children, spouse, home, and the rest, even-mindedness amidst pleasant and unpleasant circumstances, because happiness and distress exist in the world, right? Desire and hatred exist in the world, right? So what should you do? You should be even-minded amidst both of those and not identify too much with those. You follow? Stuff to be seen and smelled, you should be detached from that. Constant unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All of these will result in you successfully living in this world and acquiring knowledge and being able to understand the highest object of knowledge, the thing that you should really be wanting to know, which will be described subsequently. Did you guys follow that? Okay. Final thoughts? Anybody? So just to wrap it up, so I can dismiss our crew on IGTV. It switches, and now we're discussing the Upanishads. 6 questions. Chaitra, Chaitragya, Jnanam Gyayam, Purusha, and Prakriti. Spirit and matter. What is knowledge and how to acquire it, and what is worth studying. The body and the soul. Krishna answers pretty simply. The field is the body. The knower of the field is the self. The knower of the field is the knower of the body. The conscious self. I know everything. If you know the difference between the self and the body, you're in knowledge. Let me give you a little more information. There's actually a number of elements within a given body, within this world. And here's how you should interface with that world that I've just described. And that's how you acquire knowledge, is knowing how to interface with this world. That is knowledge, knowing how to interface with this world. So pleasure and pain exist, you should be detached from both. Desire and hatred exist, you should be aloof from both. You follow? And now it's telling you how to interface with the various things that have just been described. And that's true knowledge. To really know the body is to know how to utilize the body for self-realization instead of for sense gratification. And that's the first dozen verses of the 13th chapter, which is related to the rest of the Gita. This is heavy knowledge stuff, so it's super philosophical, super deep. It's not easy reading, to be quite honest. I tried to make it digestible, but it's not easy reading for anybody. It seems like anyone in the caste system can follow these. Knowledge is for all. 100%, Carlos. Yes. There's nothing in here about the caste system or this just being for Brahmanas or something like that. Nothing whatsoever. Okay. Thank you, IGTV. And if you're on Facebook, Zoom, or you're here, give me some feedback.